Hello, everybody. It is Saturday, June the 4th, 2026.
July the 4th, Andrew. July the 4th.
Oh, I think I'll start that one again. Hey, my geography is, no, it's not geography. What is it? What's the word? My
Intelligent.
knowledge,
Yeah.
my
Intelligent.
chronology, my dates are bad. Okay, ready?
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. It is July the 4th, 2026. Celebration of you know what. I might actually put this interview out on July the 5th, but it's worth noting that we're speaking on the 250th anniversary of America's birthday foundation. And it's the day for our weekly tech roundup with my old friend Keith Teare. That was the week newsletter. And surprise, surprise, his editorial this week focuses on what he calls America the Beautiful. So happy anniversary, Keith. I was thinking about this before we went live. What's your relationship with the United States? You came here quite late in your life, didn't you? Relatively late, certainly compared to me.
Yeah, it just shows how old I am because I've actually been here 30 years now. I came here initially in 1996 and spent some time in New York, realized how superior American investing landscape, let's say, risk appetite was compared to the UK, and determined that living in the UK was for fools. So I moved here.
So what year?
96.
96. So your life has really been pretty much split or relatively split between the UK and the US. Do you have a US passport?
I do. I am a citizen.
And you have a very core identity as an entrepreneur, as a startup guy. Does that connect with your identity as an American? Do you think of yourself as both an American and a startup entrepreneur?
Actually, I don't think of myself as an American. I mean, it's one of the labels I have, and I embrace it. That's fine, but it's not a singular label. I'd say entrepreneur is way more core for me, and then there's probably other labels like I don't know. I think of myself as essentially a critical thinker that wants change. That's my real core.
And you bred three Americans. You have three big American boys, and they're young men now. So yep. You're adding to what you call the America the Beautiful. What's the editorial this week, Keith? What are you writing about? How are you combining this week in tech with the July 4th celebrations?
I think it's really two things. Firstly, it's an acknowledgement of America's success over the last 250 years. America really symbolizes human growth, human progress, economically, lifestyle-wise, and in politics. I mean, the fact that we have Donald Trump as president, voted for by more Americans than voted against him, symbolizes that the people still rule. Because most intellectuals, the last thing they wanted to see was Trump winning, but he won. And
I thought American intellectuals liked Trump.
There are some who do, aren't there?
Well, one American intellectual, yourself, is, shall we say, ambivalent. So on the one hand, your editorial talks about the achievement of America, abundance, wealth creation, and freedom. But on the other hand, you're not some sort of MAGA fellow, are you, Keith? I mean, you recognize that not everything is perfect in the American garden in July 2026.
Well, I mean, the pinnacle of capitalism is still flawed. Easy for me to say, but look, capitalism at its best still has huge swathes of poor people who can barely eat. And so any idea that it's perfect, this idea of the perfect union, is deeply flawed as a concept and always has been. And because I believe that America has kind of peaked in world terms, it's only going to get worse unless policy kicks in to make sure it doesn't. So we're at a moment where the next 250 years, there is a lot to play for, but it's not a foregone conclusion that it looks anything like the past 150 years if you look at it through American glasses.
And you're looking at it through American glasses. You're an American living in Palo Alto, or you are half American at least. One of the pieces that I forwarded to you, which you included in the newsletter this week, and I found this astonishing, it's from the Wall Street Journal, which is not biased, although I think they would enjoy this sort of piece, is that the United States added 1,200 new millionaires a day last year, which is astonishing, especially when it's compared with the rest of the world. The Chinese only added a little over 5 million over the year. America added 23.5 million. Oh no, these are countries with the most millionaires. So America has almost 24 million. China only has a little over 5. And then we get down to Italy, Netherlands, South Korea, or Australia, France, UK, all under 3 million. So it's really an astonishing statistic. I don't know what it tells us, but it certainly speaks of the prosperity amongst some for America.
Well, look, the math underlying that is gross domestic product per capita. What is the average salary? And in America, it's not just salary, but income. It's around $85,000 a year per head. Obviously, it's highly skewed between rich and poor, but the average is $85,000 a year. China is on $20-something thousand a year. So just the math alone will tell you that someone who owns a house that's worth more than $1 million, which probably has to be the case for most of the middle class on the coastal areas of America, California in particular, where there are...
You can't even buy a hut in where you live in Palo Alto for less than about 10 million, can you?
Exactly. And there's 60 million people in California, if my memory serves me right. So those numbers really are disguising a highly skewed set of people that live either in California or New York and maybe Boston, that live in homes worth more than $1 million.
Your editorial this week focuses not on the past, but on the future. You ask in the editorial how to make America more prosperous, both literally, I think, and in symbolic, cultural, and perhaps communal or political terms. You refer to an interesting piece by Scott Nolan, America's Next 250 Years. He was writing as a guest in the Paddy McCormack blog. What's Nolan saying, and how does he connect the next 250 years of America with tech?
Well, Nolan focuses very, very temporarily on energy. He draws the conclusion that the next 250 years is predicated on abundant and inexpensive energy. And without that, everything that AI prefigures, including robotics, but also intelligence, can't develop. And so his answer to the scarcity of energy is to focus on a nuclear renaissance and space, which seems to be coming consensus.
Well, that's Muskian, isn't it?
It is Muskian, yeah, very Muskian. But Musk, to be
Muskian
fair,
without the Musk, without all the distractions of Elon's bizarre politics.
I don't think he's...
Well, we're not having another Musk argument on such a nice day, Keith. Let's leave that one. I shouldn't have brought it up. My fault. I acknowledge it. Move on.
Yeah, but it is a good article, the Next 250, because it predicates itself on what's happened since 1776 and then talks about the future. And the future requires innovation, as did the past. When it was
the thing with energy is really interesting, but I wonder whether there's a lot of unintended consequences. I mean, when America began fracking, which I think explains what their energy lead over the rest of the world, particularly in Europe, no one made the argument, even the most extreme frackers, they didn't make the argument in terms of AI. Can we be sure that in another 50 or 100 or certainly 250 years, energy will be so central? We might have fixed it entirely. Or maybe we'll be in a post-AI age, which energy becomes irrelevant.
Yeah, I think it would be a fairly solid prediction to say that energy eventually will be close to free, because we will figure out how to leverage the sun and also nuclear fusion. And when you do that, energy scales close to free. So I don't think energy will remain a bottleneck. I do strongly believe energy will be decentralized. That is to say, it won't require a national grid, which will be a huge innovation. Why? Because you'll be able to produce energy locally, very, very cheaply, and distribute it locally without relying on a grid, on a global or national grid. So I don't see energy as a bottleneck, but I do see it as a challenge, because those things I just described are still unsolved problems. There are really good people working on them and making progress, which is why you can predict they'll probably be successful. I wouldn't want to put a timeline on it, because that requires scientific breakthroughs, which are highly unpredictable.
Right. And that comes back to your notion of abundance. You and I have talked about that. You have your own manifesto in this editorial of 5 things that America can do to make itself a better country, not in the next 250 years, but certainly in the next 25 or 50 associated with AI. Maybe you can mention some of these points, Keith.
Yeah, well, the context here is Sam Altman in the Financial Times apparently offering the US government a 5% ownership stake for a sovereign wealth fund in OpenAI.
Right. He wrote the editorial in the FT on July the 1st, and everyone's picked up on this. The fact that, you know, there are 2 interpretations. The slippery Sam crowd, I guess, assumes he's just selling out to Donald Trump. Others are a little more generous.
Yeah, and now there's some context there as well. Sam Altman joined the Dario Amodei regulation camp this week as well, although he argued for a global regulator, not just national. National was his plan B, but he said he would prefer if it was global. And that, I believe, is triggered by the success of the Chinese model. Is it GLC2, G something C2, GLM 2, 5.2. That's it, GLM 5.2, which is a frontier model by capability, but is open source and can be run on your own hardware. And there is a flood of American companies running towards using it and replacing OpenAI and Anthropic due to cost, and only using OpenAI and Anthropic for a small subset of highly difficult use cases. So we're moving to this, it's called a token router concept in the enterprise, where Palantir and NVIDIA.
Yeah, Alex Karp just was on CNBC making some strongly anti-Anthropic OpenAI remarks. Standing back a little bit, Keith, the headlines about OpenAI and talks to give Trump administration a 5% stake in the company. One of the things I've thought, and we've talked about this in the last few months, is this convergence of the American and Chinese model. Is this more evidence Trump's interference, or the US states' interference in Anthropic and OpenAI, Altman's willingness to allow the state to own and in some ways operate his company? Does that suggest that the Chinese and American models are actually becoming quite similar?
Similar in some ways, but honestly, I think the key driver here is Altman and Amodei being scared of open source models and wanting regulation. And so I think it's very self-serving. The fact that they're offering 5%, which is a pitifully small amount, is indicative of that they're not really serious.
Well, that may be their opening offer. They may go a bit higher. There's a lot of money there. I mean, if they're worth trillions of dollars, 5% of 2 or 3 trillion is a lot of money.
Yeah, and I still think OpenAI is going to be worth 10 trillion. So
you've said that, but is Sam beginning to become like Dario? You always used to love Sam and hate Dario. Now are they in the same camp?
I think when it comes to wanting government protection against open source models, yeah, they're converging. They're very different in other ways, of course. My manifesto that you called it, I'm saying, and I'm echoing others, so it's not my idea. It should be 75%, not 5%.
Well, own 75% of what? The government should own 75% of OpenAI?
Of the shares, yeah. Not the government, but a sovereign wealth fund, which I think is not the same as the government. I think it's very important it isn't the government. It's a sovereign wealth fund. And that sovereign wealth fund itself should be owned by every citizen. Every citizen. When you're born, you should get shares in it. And it should pay dividends every year based on liquidity. You know, that's an American idea. Probably you need a global version of that idea if this is really going to work. And my final...
I somehow doubt you'll get a global, and it actually brings more into context the increasing sensitivity over citizenship and immigration. Because if what you're calling for actually happened, let's just say every citizen owns a little bit of 75% of OpenAI and Anthropic and all the big tech companies of the future, then being an American citizen would be a very lucrative business.
You know, they did something very similar in Norway. Norway has the
but Norway had all the natural resources.
I don't know if there's any real difference between being the leader in AI and natural resources from a value point of view. I think that...
Yeah, I wonder what Norway's policy is in terms of, I'm guessing that Norway is a very, very hard place to immigrate to, and certainly to get citizenship, but I don't know.
I don't know the details on citizenship. I think immigration, like in most of Europe, is easier, especially if you're a refugee, because they have very liberal...
Right, well, let's sidestep that one. So you've got 75% sovereign wealth fund. What else on your manifesto in the US to make America even greater in the next...
Yeah, so number 2 is the sovereign wealth fund has to be citizen-owned, not government-owned. It should pay dividends.
Just before, how would that work? How is it citizen-owned? You mean everyone would vote in it? Everyone would be a shareholder? How does that work?
You start with everyone's a shareholder, and it would be roughly divided. And every year, as new people are born, they get shares at birth. Just like already they're getting $1,000 at birth, so it's clearly doable. So yeah, it's citizen-owned. It would pay dividends. That's the key. So as the value grows, you would sell some shares every year to pay dividends from the central fund.
But to borrow some famous words of George Orwell, wouldn't some citizens be more equal than others in this? Or would Sam Altman have, I mean, obviously he'd have his own ownership of OpenAI as an entrepreneur and founder, but would he have the same amount of stock as the person who cleans his home?
In terms of allocations from the sovereign wealth fund, it would only be equal, as in every individual. So a family of 5 would get more shares than a family of 2, but everyone would get the same allocation. Of course, in the rest of their life, they'd be unequal. This wouldn't overrule all their other wealth. So it doesn't create some weird...
So state stock ownership. So we got that, and then you also, just to add the other 3, enable dividends to be paid to all shareholders, extend this idea beyond the citizens of a single country, which doesn't seem very realistic, and then don't think nationalization, think distribution of the legacy of human progress to all using a decentralized model, which sounds to me like you're having your cake and eating it.
Well, it's innovative. And by the way, I am not making, this isn't my idea. I'm actually pulling out of the ecosystem what is becoming an interesting conversation, and I'm picking my favorites. And these are my favorites. These are the ones I would focus on. I agree with you. Number 4 is the hardest because I don't know how that would work. It would need the companies to decide that it's global. And the sovereign wealth fund would be something they would set up on behalf of everybody. That obviously is doable if they choose to do it. They're not looking like they want to do it. In fact, the philanthropic part of Sam Altman disappeared this week with his 5% offer. So I wouldn't be optimistic about the companies leading this. And I think the only way it is global is if the companies do lead it. So that's probably
it's very unrealistic. I mean, one of the other things that struck me about today, I mean, of course, it's the 250th anniversary of the American founding, but we're also 6 months into 2026, Keith. You and I have been doing a weekly tech show. There was an interesting piece in The Atlantic about why everyone is suddenly talking about universal basic capital, which is what you're talking about in your manifesto. Astonishing, it seems to me that nobody was talking about that 6 months ago. It's astonishing how fast things have moved.
Yeah, well, it's a symptom of the fact that people are starting to believe that AI will automate eventually everything over the next 50 years, let's say, certainly more quickly than 250 years. And if that's true, you need to find a way to distribute the means of life to people. And universal basic capital is being favored over universal basic income because it gives you ownership and therefore repeated wealth.
Yeah, I mean, basically in American language, it creates a nation of investors rather than
welfare.
Welfare, what Reagan famously called welfare queens or kings or whatever else.
Well, welfare is obviously a terrible idea. As a working class kid myself, who was on free school meals, there's nothing more demeaning than feeling like you're being given a handout.
Yeah, but what's the difference? It's just language. Whether you describe it as welfare or ownership, it's still the same thing.
No, I think there's a massive difference, and I speak personally here. I mean, the difference between people with more than you giving you something to help you versus you have a right as a citizen to a piece of the pie, very different emotionally, psychologically, in terms of longevity and reproducibility. It's very, very different.
It's astonishing, though, how this idea of universal basic capital, which is a very radical idea, certainly in the context of free market American capitalism, has suddenly become fashionable. I wonder where it isn't fashionable. I'm not sure anyone's talking about it politically. I mean, Trump, as a very smart opportunist, might jump on it. I don't see anyone in the Democratic Party jumping on it, which should be their natural area. I would have thought that. I mean, you've talked about Bernie Sanders in the past and AOC. Is the left of the Democratic Party beginning to talk more openly about universal basic capital?
A little bit, but the problem is that their historical ideology gets in the way and they frame it as welfare. They want the government to own this, and then they want welfare. They want politicians to decide how the wealth is spent. So they miss the whole distributed automatic part of this. And they have a centralized government-owned vision, and that obviously that won't fly. So they're gonna shoot themselves.
When you say obviously it won't fly, you mean politically or in practice?
Politically, it won't fly. That really is nationalization.
Well, then you have Hugo Chavez coming to America. And one would have expected the abundance wing of the Democratic Party, the Ezra Klein, Derek Thompson wing, to jump on it too. But I don't see any of the politicians on that side of the party articulating. I mean, it could be their core ideology in 2028, universal basic capital. I mean, I'm guessing that someone like Gavin Newsom, who is equally opportunistic politically as Donald Trump might jump on it.
Here's the difficulty. Universal basic capital requires acknowledging that capitalism can create huge wealth. And of course, that is a narrative violation on the left. So the idea that you're pro-capitalist, but everyone should own it, is a natural idea for the left, but they're stuck in their anti-capitalism framing, so that seizing the means of production through government diktat is their chosen method, and that just isn't a popular idea.
Is there then a profound incompatibility between the idea of universal basic capital and what the left of the Democratic Party, the Mandamis of the world, describe as democratic socialism? Can you be a democratic socialist and be in favor of universal basic capital?
I'm not super familiar with the democratic socialists, Andrew, so I don't want to...
Well, you know the general position of Mandami and Sanders and AOC. I don't see whether... I'm not sure that... I mean, a lot of these issues are just semantic.
Well, no, look, in the history of ideas on the left, really post-Lenin, the left is dominated by the idea of seizing the state through elections, using taxes and spending on good things as their core. And so any idea of the withering away of the state, which is a left-wing idea historically.
So I take your point, but what's the state's role in universal basic capital? They're still creating the rules.
Actually, if you do it through a sovereign wealth fund, the state becomes less and less significant. Actually, the state shrinks. What happens is this sovereign wealth fund becomes a universal means of distributing wealth. And the actual state infrastructure, other than providing services like roads or health or education, the state shrinks.
So in a weird way, the OpenAIs and Anthropics and Googles of the world become the state in this idea of universal basic capital.
No, the state still exists because there's still common things we all need. And
I mean, police, roads, defense.
Yeah, many things we still need. And presumably the state would be a shareholder in this fund as well. It wouldn't all be going to people to pay for some of those things. So the state doesn't go away, but it becomes an administrative state, and money is distributed through a sovereign wealth fund. It's actually interesting.
Yeah, and it's certainly something that we will be coming back to time and time again. You said that one of the reasons why universal basic capital is becoming so fashionable is because people are beginning to recognize how profound the AI changes will be. You linked to a piece by Eric Bryn Johnson of Stanford, formerly of MIT, old friend of the show, who was one of the early economists to call the AI entry level jobs crisis. What's Bryn Johnson saying, and what are other economists saying about now this obvious impact of AI on work, on jobs?
Yeah, well, he's at the center of quite a big debate this week, because there's a whole body of other stuff that came out that said companies using AI are hiring faster than companies who are not. And that is the opposite point, that the use of AI creates opportunities that you have to hire for internally. And so there's a job boom in these AI companies. Both Amazon and Microsoft this week announced plans to put up to 6,000 engineers on the front line with customers to help them implement AI, for example. And so there's a short-term debate about, well, will AI really take jobs, or is it actually going to create jobs? Now, in a snapshot world, both things are true. There are more jobs being created around AI. That is definitely true. And the more AI you are, the more you're creating those jobs. That's also true. But if you stand back and look at 5, 10, 15 years, I think our friend at Stanford is more true, is more correct, which is that automation is going to accelerate. The things that you need a front engineer for today will be done by agents tomorrow. And so the long run is a declining employment for sure. And anyone who sees it differently hasn't looked at, Musk's plans on robots. It is definitely declining employment, which doesn't have to be a bad thing. It can be a really good thing, actually, for humanity.
So what happens, Keith, and we've talked about this many times in the past, if everyone starts losing their jobs and this universal basic capital initiative gets implemented, what are people going to do all day?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do is, you see this? This is my new camera. I am a hobbyist with photography. In fact, there's a Nikon camera taking a picture of this Fuji camera. I'm going to do whatever the F I want and be happy.
Well, one fellow cameraman sadly passed away this week. A good old friend of yours, Om Malik, one of the founding bloggers, very influential blogger. He died early, 59 years old. I know you were quite impacted by his death and by what people have written. MG Siegler wrote a very nice obituary, and he got an obituary in the Times. Tell us, remind us of Malik's place in the history of tech, Keith.
Well, Om was actually a scientist, and he graduated from a top Indian university in science, chemistry, I think it was, and became the voice of deep tech, especially wireless communications and telecoms, in the late 90s, writing about deep tech. He was a very deep thinker, thoughtful, very generous person who became an expert in technology. In fact, if you go back and read everything he wrote since the 90s, it's a chronicle of what's happened in America over those years. He ended up creating GigaOM, which was his own branded site, and hired quite a lot of people to work with him at the same time that TechCrunch existed. Him and Mike Harrington became good friends, competitors, but friends at TechCrunch. And they co-hosted the Crunchbase, the Crunches, the award ceremony every year. And so, I've known throughout that entire period as I wouldn't say we were friends, but we were acquaintances. And we spent a wonderful few days in Iceland on a photography. He's a photographer.
And in your editorial this week, you have a nice photograph of him and then one of yourself. What do you think, looking back? You were around, as you say, you were one of the co-founders of TechCrunch, controversial TechCrunch, controversial co-founder with Mike Harrington. What do you think Om's career and his work tell us about our current situation, the opportunities and the predicaments that we've talked about, the opportunity of universal basic capital, but the reality of more and more inequality, and in some ways the impoverishment of general life and culture in the United States?
I don't want to put words in his now deceased mouth, but like a lot of Indian intellectuals, Om was a liberal, I would say, with a capital L. And a humanist, and often wrote critically about the extremes of capitalism and favorably about some of the remedies. Doing his own blog in a way was an interesting hybrid. He became a capitalist to be independent, and his independence led to freedom of choice for him, until it didn't. There's a long story about how GigaOM ended up going away, and then he joined True Ventures with John Callahan and the other founders there. But he definitely prefigured. I would say there wouldn't be a Substack today unless there was a GigaOM and a TechCrunch. There's a direct line from the New York Times to GigaOM and TechCrunch to Substack to That Was the Week.
Well, thank you, Om. And without you, Om, we wouldn't be here. Finally, Keith, there was an interesting piece in the Times this week by a former Biden official, Jennifer Harris, about the title was "The Generational Force Hollowing Out the Economy." She argues that basically all the AI money is impoverishing the rest of the economy. What would be the message of somebody like as you say, a liberal, a progressive, to people like Harris, not Kamala Harris, but Jennifer Harris, and other people who are many other progressives who are deeply suspicious and hostile to tech?
Well, I think they'd empathize, actually, without necessarily being as acerbic. It is true that money chases opportunity. And wherever the greatest opportunity is, the money will flow. It's a little bit like water going on the most natural path. So it isn't something you could stop. It's organic to the system we live in. And it does mean that there's less money for other things. Why? Because the other things are not as lucrative in the short term. And money seeks to replicate money. So I don't think she's describing anything badly. I think she's describing it quite well. I also think it would be wrong to be against it. The future is in recreating the infrastructure we live on, and money will flow there, and that recreated infrastructure probably lifts us all up. So ultimately, it's a good thing, even if there's pain in various places as a result of it.
Well, there you have it. Keith Tear's take on not just the American 250th year anniversary, but the half-year anniversary of 2026 when it comes to tech. Lots more, I'm sure, Keith, in the next 6 months on universal basic capital and the impact of AI on jobs and prosperity. Happy 250th, Keith. You're going to be celebrating this evening or this afternoon with hot dogs and fireworks, or are you going to be doing something else?
I think, fish and chips and the World Cup.
You get thrown out of the country. Don't you know that the rebellion was against the British?
No, it was the king, not the British. I'm against the king too. I'm with the Americans on that one.